Video 5, which is chapter 4 of Letting Go, The Pathway of Surrender by David Hawkins. A brand new series coming up right after this. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Yoel Presents YouTube channel. I'm Yoel, very grateful to have you. Thanks to all those who have been partaking in this brand new series on Dr. David Hawkins' landmark book, Letting Go, The Pathway of Surrender. If it's your first time visiting, then great to have you aboard. It's best to actually start from video 1 in this series and work your way towards this video, which is video 5, chapter 4. But of course, you're welcome to join in on this video as well, whatever floats your boat, so to speak. For all those who have subscribed, by the way, thank you so much for doing that. I really appreciate it. If you haven't subscribed yet, then if you could take one more moment out of your day, and I appreciate you're taking a few moments out of your day to join my video, if you could take another moment to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell, you won't miss a future video in this series or any other video that I launch, and you'll also be helping me to continue producing videos just like this one, as well as liking the video, sharing it with anybody who you think can enjoy this series or any other video, as well as leaving comments or feedback. It's always appreciated. Okay, so if this is your first time on this topic of David Hawkins' book of Letting Go, and you haven't watched the previous videos, then I'll just repeat for you, and I'm sorry to my audience who have watched the previous videos. They keep hearing me say the same things over and over, but that's the way of YouTube. What are you going to do? What I'm doing is I'm reading the entire chapter of each book. So it's a chapter by chapter synopsis, which means I'm actually reading the entire chapter. It's pretty lengthy. And the reason I'm doing that is not just to be another sort of audible competitor or something of that nature, but more so that you can hear David Hawkins' words himself in his own words, as opposed to me just summarizing everything for you. Of course, I will be providing summaries or insights or, my synopsis when it is necessary or when I feel I have something to add. But for the most part, I do want you to hear Dr. Hawkins in his own words. And because I assume most of you who have come to this video do not have the book, I do suggest getting the book, and I always link to the Amazon page where you can buy the book in the description below. But for those who don't have the book, at least you can listen to this as you're going about your day, whether you're doing chores or you're working, etc. As I say in every other video, I don't expect you to stare at my pretty face while I read through this the entire time. Definitely you can put this on in the background. Of course, if you pay attention at the end when I do a summary of points, then it may be better suited for you if you actually pay attention to the video and not do other work in the meantime. But of course, that's your choice. And I am grateful to all of you for just coming to the video either way. But obviously my intention and my goal is for you to walk away with not just the words of David Hawkins, but also some added insights to put it into context. Okay, so with all that said, I'm going to jump right into chapter 4, which is entitled Apathy and Depression. For those following along in the book, it starts from page 50. Apathy is the belief I can't. It is the feeling that we cannot do anything about our situation and no one else can help. It is hopelessness and helplessness. It is associated with such thoughts as, who cares? What's the use? It's boring. Why bother? I can't win anyway. This is the role exhibited by Eeyore, the glum character in Winnie the Pooh cartoons who says, oh well, won't do good anyway, discouragement, defeat, impossible, too hard, all alone, give up, isolated, estranged, withdrawn, cut off, desolate, depressed, depleted, unfulfilling, pessimistic, careless, humorless, meaningless, absurd, pointless, helpless, failure, too tired, despair, confused, forgetful, fatalistic, too late, too old, too young, mechanical, doomed, negative, forlorn, useless, lost, senseless, bleak, blasé. The biologic purpose of apathy is to summon aid, but part of the feeling is that no help is possible. Much of the world's population is functioning on the level of apathy. Wow. Much of the world's population is functioning on the level of apathy. Pretty incredible and pretty sad when you think about it. For them, there is no hope that they will be able to meet their basic needs, nor will help be forthcoming from elsewhere. The average person is often apathetic in a number of areas in life, but only periodically faces overwhelming apathy about their whole life situation. Apathy indicates a lack of life energy and is close to death. This was observed during World War II Blitz of London. Infants were removed to nurseries and remote safe locations of England where their physical, nutritional, and medical needs were well attended. However, the infants developed apathy and began to fail. They lost their appetites and the death rate was high. It was discovered that apathy resulted from a lack of nurturing and emotional closeness to a mothering figure. It was an emotional state and not a physical one. Without love and affection, they lost the will to live. In our country, we see depressed economic areas where an entire local population goes into apathy. When people from such areas appear on the television news, it is often with such comments as, "When the welfare check runs out, I guess we just face starvation. There's no hope for us." Feelings of apathy about the letting go technique itself may appear as resistance. These may take the form of attitudes and thoughts such as, "It won't work anyway. What's the difference? I'm not ready for this yet. I can't feel. I'm too busy. I'm tired of letting go. I'm too overwhelmed. I forgot. I'm too depressed. I'm too sleepy." The way out of apathy is to remind ourselves of our intention, which is to get higher and freer, to become more effective and happy, and to let go of the resistance to the technique itself. I can't versus I won't. Another way out of apathy is to look at the payoff we are getting out of the apathetic attitudes. The payoff may be in the face-saving excuses to cover up what is actually fear. Since in reality we are very capable beings, most I can'ts are really I won'ts. Behind the I can'ts or the I won'ts is frequently a fear. Then, when we look at the truth of what is behind the feeling, we have already moved up the scale from apathy to fear. Remember, the reason we're doing this is because apathy is on a very low, I think the lowest part of that state, those stages of consciousness that I talked about in the last video. So we're starting from these lower levels of consciousness to find ways of letting go of them to move our way up the scale. We want to get to that midpoint of courage and beyond, of course. And the way to do that is to work on the letting go technique. So Hawkins over here is starting from the lowest point, which is apathy, just a reminder. So back in the book, we have already moved up the scale from apathy to fear. Fear is a higher energy state than apathy. Fear at least begins to motivate us into action, and in that action we can begin, again, surrender fear and move up to anger or pride or courage, all of which are higher states than apathy. Let's take a typical human problem and trace how the mechanism of surrender works to free us from an inhibition. Public speaking is one of the most common inhibitions. On the level of apathy in this arena, we say, "Oh, I can't possibly speak in public. It is way too overwhelming. Nobody will want to hear me anyway." By the way, this reminds me of a joke from Seinfeld where he talks about the fact that public speaking is the number one fear and death is number two, which means that somebody would rather be in the casket than the one standing giving a eulogy over the person in the casket. Seinfeld words it in a better way, but this reminds me of that joke. Anyway, back to public speaking in the book. Nobody will want to hear me anyway. I don't have anything worth saying. If we remind ourselves of our intention, we will see that the apathy is merely covering up fear. Now the thought of speaking in public is frightening, not hopeless. This brings about a certain clarity. The facts are not that we can't, but merely that we are afraid. As this fear comes up and is let go, we become aware of the fact that we have a desire to do the very thing that we fear. I know for myself, for example, I don't love to public speak, ironically, because I do these videos, which is a form of public speaking, although I'm alone here and not in front of an actual audience. But I wanted to do stand-up comedy, and that's a big combination of fears for me because it combines public speaking fears with the fear of not being accepted. You make a joke and nobody laughs. That's a big fear of mine. And thankfully, I was able to do it. I've only done it once as of the recording of this video in June 2025. I've wanted to go back a lot. This is probably an apathetic excuse. I haven't had the time. Okay, so there you go. I'm aware of it now because of this book. But in any event, I can tell you from my experience that letting go of this fear and doing it was amazing. Does that mean that I did amazing and that I didn't bomb? No, I bombed. I think I bombed. Depends who you ask. But it's not like my routine was an astounding success. But for me, it was a success because I did it. I let go of those fears to do it. And that was a big success for me on a personal consciousness level. Back to the book. As this fear comes up and is let go, we become aware of the fact that we have a desire to do the very thing that we fear. Now, when looking at that desire, which is blocked by fear and perhaps compounded by some grief over lost opportunities in the past, anger arises. At this point, we have already moved from apathy to grief to desire and up to anger. In anger, there is much more energy and capacity for action. In anger, it often takes the form of resentment, such as resentment that we agreed to the public speaking and now feel obligated to do it. There is also anger about our fear, which has blocked accomplishment in the past, and that anger leads to a decision to do something about it. This decision might take the form of a public speaking course. When we sign up for a public speaking course, we have already moved up to the energy of pride in that we have finally taken the bull by the horns and are doing something about it. On the way to the speaking course, again, more fear will arise. As this is constantly acknowledged and surrendered, we become aware that we have the courage and our capacity at least to face our fears and take action to overcome them. The level of courage has a lot of energy. That energy takes the form of letting go of residual fear, anger, and desire, so that in the middle of the speaking class, we suddenly experience acceptance. With acceptance, there is the freedom from resistance, which has taken the form previously of fear, apathy, and anger. Now we begin to experience pleasure. There is a self-confidence of acceptance. I can do it. On the level of acceptance, there is greater awareness of others, so that in the speaking class, we become aware of the pain, suffering, and embarrassment of others in the class and begin to be concerned about them. With the emergence of this compassion towards others, there is a loss of self-consciousness. With the emergence of selflessness comes moments of peace. On the way home from class, we experience an inner contentment, a feeling that we have grown, that we have shared with others. In the experience of sharing, we have forgotten ourselves for a few moments and have been more concerned with the happiness of someone else. We take pleasure in the accomplishments of others. In this state, there is a transforming grace, a discovery of our inner compassion, a feeling of connectedness with others, and a compassion for their suffering. With the full development of this progression, we might then share with others how we had a fear of public speaking, the steps we took to overcome it, the success we experienced, the increase of our self-esteem, and the positive changes in our relationships. This entire progression is the basis of a great deal of the power of self-help groups, the sharing of inner experiences from the lowest to the highest levels on the scale of emotions. That which in the beginning seemed formidable and overwhelming has now been surmounted and handled, with the resultant increase of aliveness and well-being. This increase in self-esteem then spills over into other areas of life. And the increase in confidence results in greater material abundance and capability in vocational functioning. On this level, love takes the form of sharing and encouraging others, and our activities are constructive instead of destructive. The energy radiated out is then positive and attractive to others, resulting in a constant positive feedback. Once we've experienced this progression up the scale of emotions in any one particular area, we now begin to realize that it can be done in other areas of limitation in our lives. Behind all of the I can'ts are merely I won'ts. The I won'ts mean I am afraid to, or I'm ashamed to, or I have too much pride to try, for fear I might fail. Behind that is anger at ourselves and circumstances engendered by the pride. Acknowledging and letting go of these feelings brings us up to courage, and with that, finally, acceptance and an inner peacefulness, at least as it regards the area which has been surrendered. Apathy and depression are the prices we paid for having settled for and bought into our smallness. It's what we get for having played the victim. I've talked a lot about how Hawkins will talk about playing the victim and allowed ourselves to be programmed. And it's the price we paid for having bought into the negativity. It's what results from resisting the part of ourselves that is loving, courageous, and great. It results from allowing ourselves to be invalidated by ourselves or others. It is the consequence of holding ourselves in a negative context. In reality, it is only a definition of ourselves that we have unwittingly allowed to happen. The way out is to become more conscious. What does it mean to become more conscious? To begin with, becoming more conscious means to start looking for the truth for ourselves instead of blindly allowing others to be programmed, instead of rather blindly allowing ourselves to be programmed, whether from without or by an inner voice from within the mind, which seeks to diminish and invalidate, focusing on all that is weak and helpless. To get out of it, we have to, and I'm going to read that paragraph again because it's so important and I kind of bumbled it. What does it mean to become more conscious? To begin with, becoming more conscious means to start looking for the truth for ourselves instead of blindly allowing ourselves to be programmed, whether from without or by an inner voice within the mind, which seeks to diminish and invalidate, focusing on all that is weak and helpless. To get out of it, we have to accept the responsibility that we have bought into the negativity and have been willing to believe it. The way out of this, then, is to start questioning everything. Doesn't mean to be cynical, and Hawkins does say it's okay to be somewhat skeptical, or not even somewhat, to be skeptical, but at the same time, you can question things, start understanding and learning things for yourself. Okay, it doesn't mean you can't turn to others who you feel have expertise in a certain subject. Expertise is a big one as I record this. If you've been watching the podcast of Joe Rogan, etc., I won't get into all that. But the point is that it doesn't mean that you can't turn to others for advice or input, but definitely you can question things for yourself. There are many models of the mind. One of the most recent has been that of the computer. We can look at the mind's concepts, thought, and I would say today, AI. We can look at the mind's concepts, thoughts, and belief systems as programs. Because they are programs, they can be questioned, canceled, and reversed. Positive programs can replace negative ones if we so choose. The smaller aspect of ourselves is very willing to accept negative programming. If we look at the source of our thoughts, begin to identify their origins, and stop the vanity of labeling them as mine and therefore sacrosanct, we notice that thoughts can be looked at objectively. We see that their origins were often the early childhood training from parents, family, and teachers, as well as dribbles and drabbles of information we picked up from playmates, newspapers, movies, television, radio, church, novels, and the automatic input from our senses. All this went on unwittingly without our having exercised any conscious choice. Not only that, but out of our unconsciousness, ignorance, innocence, and naivety, plus the nature of the mind itself, we ended up as the composite of all the negative garbage prevalent in the world. By the way, Michael Singer talks about this idea of collecting garbage. I always mention Michael Singer in my videos from the book Living Untethered. I have to let go, by the way, of my resistance. I'm frustrated. My emotions are, I'm feeling a level of frustration and anger that I forgot to bring the Michael Singer book before I started recording. I wanted to have that for this video. So there's an exercise in letting go. I could let go of that anger or self-deprecation and say, it's okay. I don't have the Singer book, but I do mention Michael Singer a lot in my videos. Back to the book. Furthermore, we concluded that it applied to us personally. As we become more aware, we begin to realize that we have a choice. We can stop giving authority to all of the mind's thoughts, begin to question them, and find out if there is really any truth in them for ourselves. The feeling state of apathy is associated with the belief I can't. The mind doesn't like to hear it, but in reality, most I can'ts are I won'ts. The reason the mind doesn't want to hear this is because I can't is a cover up for other feelings. These feelings can be brought to awareness by posing the hypothetical question to oneself: is it true that I won't rather than I can't? If I accept that I won't, what situations will be brought up and how do I feel about them? As an example, let's say we have a belief system that we can't dance. We say to ourselves, perhaps that's a cover up. Maybe the truth is I don't want to and I won't. The way we can find out what the feelings are is to envision ourselves as going through the process of learning to dance. As we do that, all the associated feelings now start to come up: embarrassment, pride, awkwardness, the sheer effort of learning a new skill, and the reluctance about the time and energy involved. As we replace I can't with I won't, we uncover all these feelings which can then be surrendered. We see that learning to dance means we have to be willing to let go of pride. We look at the cost and ask ourselves, am I willing to continue to pay this price? Would I be willing to let go of the fear of not succeeding? Would I be willing to let go of resisting the effort required? Would I be willing to let go of the vanity so that I can allow myself to be awkward as a learner? By the way, I'm applying all this to my stand-up comedy, the pride of wanting all my jokes to be funny, of not giving into the fear of public speaking, all that sort of stuff. You can apply this to any sort of area in your life where you thought you can't do something, but maybe really it's a matter of you won't do something, and start letting go of all that resistance. Okay? Dancing is one example. I apply it to stand-up comedy. You can apply it to any one thing in your life, of course. Back to the book. Can I let go of my stinginess and smallness and be willing to pay for the lessons and give the time? As all of the associated feelings are surrendered, it becomes very clear that the real reason is unwillingness, not incapacity. It must be remembered that we are free to acknowledge and surrender our feelings, and we are free not to surrender. As we examine our I can'ts and find out that they are really I won'ts, it does mean that we have to let go of the negative feelings that result in the I won'ts. We are perfectly free to refuse to let go. We are free to hang on to negativity as long as we want. There is no law that says we have to give it up. We are free agents. But it makes a big difference in our self-concept to realize that I won't do something is quite a different feeling than to think that I'm a victim and that I can't. For instance, we can choose to hate somebody if we want. We can choose to blame them. We can choose to blame circumstances. But being more conscious and realizing that we are freely choosing this attitude puts us in a higher state of consciousness and therefore closer to greater power and mastery than being the helpless victim of a feeling. And that leads us to blame. One of the biggest blocks to overcome in getting out of depression and apathy is that of blame. Blame is a whole subject in itself. Looking into it is rewarding. To begin with, there are a lot of payoffs to blame. We get to be innocent. We get to enjoy self-pity. We get to be the martyr and the victim. There's the victimhood again. And we get to be the recipients of sympathy. Perhaps the biggest payoff of blame is that we get to be innocent victim and the other party is the bad one. We see this game played out in the media constantly. Oh my goodness, all you have to do is go onto YouTube political channels. And I don't recommend that, but if you have done that, or even if you do enjoy that, check out what's going on with blame. This one blames this one blames that one, this one blames that government, this one blames that people, this one blames that party of politics. This one blames that one. It's all a one big blame game. We see this game played out in the media constantly, such as the endless blame game dramatized in a multitude of controversies, mudslinging, character assassinations, and lawsuits. By the way, I'll add that a lot of times it's covered up by righteous indignation. People that are claiming that their only reason they're blaming is because they care so much about the victims, but in reality, this is really a lapse of consciousness, as Hawkins shows us. In addition to the emotional payoff, blame has considerable financial benefits. Therefore, it is a tempting package to be the innocent victim, as is often financially rewarded. There was a fan, again, speaking of YouTube, and I myself have a YouTube channel, so there's nothing wrong with, having a YouTube channel, making money off of it, or anything like that. Any sort of innocent endeavor is great. But I think what he's getting at over here is when somebody takes on that role and plays the victim and the blame game for financial means that is not innocent and honest. That's when it gets to be problematic, as the example he's about to show. So don't mistake what I'm saying for saying that anybody who makes money on a YouTube channel is bad. Of course not. I myself have one. But it really depends on the intentionality and the honesty that's going in behind it, and also not getting into that blame game, which is the point of what Hawkins is talking about here. So here's his example. There was a famous example of this financial rewarding he's talking about in New York City many years ago. A public conveyance accident occurred. People poured out the front door of the vehicle, then gathered in a small crowd, furnishing their names and addresses for future financial benefit. Bystanders quickly caught on to the game and secretly climbed into the back of the vehicle so that they could emerge from the front as injured, innocent victims. They hadn't even been in an accident, but they were going to collect a reward. Blame is the world's greatest excuse. It enables us to remain limited and small without feeling guilty. But there is a cost: the loss of our freedom. Also, the role of victim brings with it a self-perception of weakness, vulnerability, and helplessness, which are the major components of apathy and depression. The first step out of blame is to see that we are choosing to blame. Other people who have had similar circumstances have forgiven, forgotten, and handled the same situation in a totally different way. We earlier saw the case of Viktor Frankl, who chose to forgive the Nazi prison guards and see a hidden gift in this experience at the concentration camps. Because others, such as Frankl, have chosen not to blame, that option is also open to us. We have to be honest and realize that we are blaming because we choose to blame. This is true no matter how justified the circumstances may appear to be. That's what I talked about before. Righteous indignation. Doesn't matter how justified somebody feels about their blaming. At the end of the day, they're still blaming. At the end of the day, there are people that are making money off that blame game, knowing that it's less than honest. Again, I'm not referring to everyone, but certain channels and certain people. And you've got to watch out for that, for your own self, for your own life, to learn from how you want to let go of that blame in your own personal life. You want to let go of that urge to have to blame somebody and be that victim. It is a totally different situation to see that we choose to blame rather than think that we have to blame. In the circumstance, the mind often thinks, well, if the other person or event is not to blame, then I must be. Blaming others or ourselves is simply not necessary. Okay, it's not a binary like that. The attraction of blame arises in early childhood as a daily occurrence in the classroom, playground, and at home among siblings. Blame is a central issue in the endless court proceedings and lawsuits that characterize our society. In truth, blame is just another one of the negative programs that we have allowed our mind to buy because we never stop to question it. Why must something always be someone's fault? Why must the whole concept of wrong, quote unquote, be introduced to the situation in the first place? Why must one of us be wrong, bad, or at fault? What seemed like a good idea at the time may not have turned out well. That's all. Unfortunate events may have just happened. To overcome blame, it is necessary to look at the secret satisfaction and enjoyment we get out of self-pity, resentment, anger, and self-excuses, and begin to surrender all these little payoffs. The purpose of this step is to move up from being a victim of our feelings to choosing to have them. If we merely acknowledge and observe them, begin to disassemble them and surrender the component parts, then we are consciously exercising choice. In this way, we make a major move out of the morass of helplessness. It is helpful in overcoming resistance and taking responsibility for our negative programs and feelings to see that they come from the small aspect of ourselves. It is the very nature of the smallest part of ourselves to think negatively. So there is an unconscious tendency to agree readily to its limited viewpoint. But that is not the whole of our beingness, for outside and beyond the smaller self is our greater self. We may not be conscious of our inner greatness. We may not be experiencing it, but it is there. If we let go of our resistance to it, we can begin to experience it. Depression and apathy, therefore, result from the willingness to hang on to the small self and its belief systems, plus the resistance to our higher self. which consists of all the opposites of the negative feelings. It is the nature of the universe that everything in it is represented by its equal and opposite. Thus, the electron's equal and opposite is the positron. Every force has an equal and opposite counterforce. Yin is compensated for by yang. There is fear, but there is also courage. There is hatred, but its opposite is love. There is timidity, but there is also bravery. There is stinginess, but there is also generosity. In the human psyche, every feeling has its opposite. The way out of negativity is therefore the willingness to acknowledge and let go of negative feelings, and at the same time, the willingness to let go of resisting the positive opposite. Depression and apathy are the result of being at the effect of the negative polarity. How does this work in everyday life? Let's look again at the example of someone's birthday that is approaching quickly. Because of things that have happened in the past, we have resentments and feel unwilling to do anything for the birthday. Somehow it just seems impossible to get out and shop for a birthday present. We resent having to spend the money. The mind conjures up all kinds of justifications. I don't have time to shop. I can't forget how mean she was. She should apologize to me first. In this case, two things are operating: clinging to the negative and the smallness in ourselves, and resisting the positive and the greatness in ourselves. The way out of apathy is to see, first of all, that I can't is an I won't. I'm looking at the I won't. We see that it is there because of the negative feelings, and as they come up, they can be acknowledged and let go. It is also apparent that we are resisting positive feelings. These feelings of love, generosity, and forgiveness can be looked at one by one. We can sit down and imagine the quality of generosity and letting go and let go, resisting it. Is there something generous within ourselves? In this case, we may not be willing to apply it to the birthday person in the beginning. What we can begin to see is the existence of such a quality as generosity within our consciousness. We begin to see that as we let go, resisting the feeling of generosity, there is generosity. We do, in fact, enjoy giving to others under certain circumstances. We begin to remember the positive flood of feelings that comes upon us when we express gratitude and acknowledge the gifts that others have given us. It's now a good time to make a plug to do another hit that subscribe and the notifications bell. Okay, shameless plug. Back to the book. We see that we have really been suppressing a desire to forgive, and as we let go of the resistance to being forgiving, there emerges the willingness to let go of the grievance. As we do this, we stop identifying with our small self and become consciously aware that there is something in us that is greater. It is always there but hidden from view. This process is applicable in all negative situations. It enables us to change the context by which we perceive our current situation. It enables us to give it a new and different meaning. It lifts us up from being the helpless victim to the conscious chooser. In the example given, it doesn't mean that we have to rush out and buy a birthday gift, but it does mean that we are now aware that we are in our current position of out of choice. We have total freedom with greater latitude of action and choice. This is a much higher state of consciousness than the helpless victim who is trapped by a past resentment. One of the laws of consciousness is we are only subject to a negative thought or belief if we consciously say that it applies to us. We are free to choose not to buy into a negative belief system. How does this work in everyday life? Let's take a common example. The newspapers report unemployment is a record high. The television news commentator states no jobs are available. At this point, we are free to refuse to buy into the negative thought form. We can say instead, unemployment does not apply to me. By refusing to accept the negative belief, it now has no hold over our life. Examples from personal experience reveal that during periods of high unemployment, such as after World War II, there were no problems getting a job. As a matter of fact, one could have 2 or even 3 jobs at the same time: dishwasher, waiter, bellhop, cab driver, bartender, factory worker, greenhouse worker, and window washer. This was a consequence of a belief system that said unemployment applies to others but not to me. And where there's a will, there's a way. There was also a willingness to relinquish pride in return for employment. Another example is that of belief systems having to do with epidemic diseases. A few years ago, 14 acquaintances were observed closely during an epidemic flu. Of the 14 people, 8 came down with the flu, but 6 did not. What is important here is not that 8 people came down with the flu, but that 6 did not. In any epidemic, there are people who do not catch it. Even during the depths of the Depression, there were still people who became wealthy and even millionaires. The thought of poverty was catching in those days, but somehow those people did not buy into it. Therefore, it did not apply to them. For negativity to apply to our life, we must first subscribe to it, and secondly, give the energy of belief if we have the power to make negativity manifest in our life. Obviously, our mind also has the power to make its converse come true. Choosing the positive. One surprising effect of the willingness to let go of our inner negativity is the discovery that the polar opposite of the negative feeling exists. There is an inner reality that we can term our inner greatness or higher self. It has much more power than inner negativity. In return for letting go of the payoffs that we were getting from the negative position, we are now surprised by the positive payouts that stem from the power of our positive feelings. For example, when we let go of blame, we experience forgiveness. Our higher self, which we might say is the composite of our higher feelings, has almost unlimited capabilities. It can create employment opportunities. It can create situations for the healing of relationships. It has the power to create the opportunity for loving relationships, financial opportunities, and physical healing. As we stop giving authority and energy to all of the negative programs that stem from our own thinking, we stop giving away our power to others and begin to own it back again. This results in a rise of self-esteem, the return of creativity, and the opening of a positive vision of the future that replaces fearfulness. We can experiment with someone with whom we have a poor relationship due to our holding of resentments. We can sit down and say to ourselves that this will merely be an experiment. The purpose for this, we tell ourselves, is strictly to learn. That is, we want to become familiar with the laws of consciousness and to watch the phenomena that occur. We acknowledge the payoffs that we have been getting from our negative feelings. We surrender each component and at the same time let go, resisting that within us which would be willing, which would be willing to heal the relationship. At this point, it is not necessary to have any personal contact with the other person. We are doing this experiment for our own sake and not for them. As we look within ourselves, we ask, what is the anger covering up? Underneath the anger, we are likely to find fear. Aside from the fear, we also find jealousy. We find competitiveness and all other little components of the feeling complex that have blocked the relationship. The simultaneous letting go of the negative and letting go of resisting the positive result in a shift of inner energies. And there is an accompanying subtle change in our self-esteem. Letting go of our resistance to the willingness to have something positive happen in the relationship is all that is necessary. We can then just sit back and watch what occurs. In this experiment, we are not interested in whether or not the other person gets it. We are only interested that we get it. We are only interested in moving our own position in the matter, and then we can just watch what happens. A very rewarding experience that usually ensues, which will take different forms depending on the circumstances. Another cause for apathy is the residual of a previously experienced traumatic overwhelm, which has not been resolved. I mentioned Michael Singer. He would call this a samskara, as I've mentioned before many times. Samskara. The mind projects onto the future with the expectation that the past will be repeated. When we discover this unconscious dynamic, we can choose to look again at the emotional complex, disassemble it into its component parts, let go of the negative aspects, and let go of our resistance to the positive ones. As we do this, our perspective of the future changes. We can forgive ourselves that at the time of the previous emotional overwhelm, we simply didn't know how to handle it. There were a lot of residuals that left us emotionally disabled at that time. But because of the unconscious mind, there is no such thing as time. We can choose at any time in the present to heal the past event. As we go through our own emotional healing for our own sake, that past event now begins to take on a different meaning. Our higher self begins to create a new context for it. We can see the hidden gift. We can end up acknowledging with gratitude that it gave us a new opportunity to learn, to grow, and to acquire wisdom. One of the most common areas with which we see this emotional crippling is after divorce. Have I mentioned I'm a divorcee? All too often, it is followed by bitterness and the impaired capacity to create a new, loving relationship. The unwillingness to let go of the blame continues the emotional crippling, which can go on for years or even a lifetime. When we come upon bitterness, what we have really discovered is an unhealed area in our own emotional makeup, and the effort that we put into healing it will bring enormous rewards. In any situation which involves suffering, we have to ask ourselves, how long am I willing to pay the cost? What were the karmic propensities to begin with? How much blame is enough? Is there a time to call an end to it? How long will I hang on to it? How much sacrifice am I willing to pay to the other person for their wrongs, real or imaginary? How much guilt is enough? How much self-punishment is enough? When will I give up the secret pleasure of the self-punishment? When does the sentence come to an end? When we really examine it, we will always find that we have been punishing ourselves for ignorance, naivety, innocence, and a lack of inner education. We can ask ourselves, was I ever trained in the technique of emotional self-healing? When I went to school, did they teach me courses on consciousness? Did anybody ever tell me that I had the freedom to choose what went into my mind? Was I ever taught that I could refuse all of the negative programming? Did anybody ever tell me the laws of consciousness? If not, why beat ourselves up about having innocently believed certain things? Why not stop beating ourselves up right now? We all did what we thought was best in the moment. It seemed like a good idea at the time, is what we can say about our past actions and those of others. We've been unwittingly programmed without our conscious assent. Out of our confusion, ignorance, and naivety, we bought into the negative programs. We let them run us, but now we can choose to stop. We can choose a different direction. We can choose to become more aware, more conscious, more responsible, and more discerning. We can refuse to sit there like a blank tape recorder taking in every program the world hands us. The world is only too willing to exploit our naivety and play upon our smallness with all of its vanities and fears. When we become aware of how we were manipulated, exploited, and taken in, anger is going to come up. Be ready to handle it. It's okay to be angry. It's better to be angry than apathetic by a long shot. In anger, we have a lot of energy. We can do something about it. We can take action. We can change our mind. We can reverse direction. Then it's easy to jump from anger to courage. On the level of courage, we can see it, examine it, and observe how it happens. We begin to see that our smallness was a bill of goods that we bought. In that investigation, we will stumble upon our inner innocence, our own inner innocence. When we rediscover it, we can let go of a lot of guilt. When the guilt goes, necessarily for self-punishment goes with it. And that necessity, rather, for self-punishment goes with it, and that lifts us right out of apathy and depression. We can choose to revalidate ourselves, our value, and our worth. And we can see how others were programmed just as we were. They too were doing what they thought was best at the time. We don't have to blame them or ourselves or anymore. We can give up the whole blame game as obsolete and ineffectual. The company we keep. Another valuable technique for getting out of apathy, depression, and situations which are predominantly being run by the thought, I can't, is to choose to be with others, with other persons who have resolved the problem with which we struggle. This is one of the great powers of self-help groups. When we are in a negative state, we have given a lot of energy to negative thought forms, and the positive thought forms are weak. Those who are in a higher vibration are free of the energy from the negative thoughts and have energized positive thought forms. Merely to be in their presence is beneficial. In self-help groups, this is called hanging out with the winners. The benefit here is on the psychic level of consciousness, and there is a transfer of positive energy and relighting of one's own latent positive thought forms. In some self-help groups, this is called getting it by osmosis. It is not necessary to know how it happens, but merely that it does happen. It is common to witness this phenomenon. For instance, in our society, most people have been trained to be logical and left-brained in their orientation. However, some people from birth are right-brain oriented. Such right-brained persons are characterized by greater powers of intuition, creativity, telepathic communication, and awareness of thought forms and energy vibrations. Frequently included among these capabilities is a capacity to see the bioenergy field around the human body called the aura. A-U-R-A. When in the presence of people with this capacity, it becomes possible to share that capacity. This was true even as skeptical, logical, left-brain male scientist who was in the company of people with a capacity to see auras. Upon following their instructions on how to see the aura, surprisingly, there was indeed a visible field of light around people's heads. In particular, the aura around one man seemed to be almost like ectoplasm hung predominantly over his left ear. On the right side of the head, however, there was practically nothing to be seen. To know whether this phenomenon was real and not coming from the imagination, it was confirmed by poking someone nearby who was adept at seeing auras. She also saw an aura that was very wide on one side and practically absent on the other. The capacity to see auras was available only when in the presence of others with that capacity. Upon leaving the instructional situation where there had been people who could see the auras, the capacity was no longer there. In the following years, when in the company of friends who could see auras, the capacity returned. One time, in the presence of a woman psychologist at a clinic whose job was that of psychic diagnosis by means of observing people's auras and their changing color patterns, there suddenly was the capacity not only to see auras, but also to see them in their scintillating colors and watch the aura change in response to fluctuating emotions. Just by talking with her, that capacity was suddenly available. It is as though when we are in the proximity of auras of people with certain capacities, some transfer of ability can take place. Simply put, we are either positively or negatively influenced by the company we keep. It is unlikely that we will overcome an ambition if we choose to be in the company of others who have our same problem. This phenomenon was evident in the case of a divorced woman who came for a consultation. She wanted to know whether or not she should have psychotherapy. Her complaints were a recurrent ulcer and a migraine headaches. As the story unfolded, great bitterness over an unfortunately traumatic divorce came forth. She had joined a consciousness-raising feminist group, she said. She described this particular group as almost completely made up of divorced women who were bitter, angry, and hateful of men. Excuse me. As a group, they were getting a lot of payoff from their negativity. In reality, their lives were forlorn and rather pathetic as they struggled to regain their self-esteem through extremes and marked emotional imbalance. Excuse me. Another thing to let go of is I forgot to bring a cup of water before I started this video. Anyway, after listening to her story and investigating her life circumstances, it was suggested that instead of psychotherapy, she follow one simple recommendation for a period of 3 months. If it didn't work, then she could reassess the need for psychotherapy. The recommendation was merely to discontinue her association with the group and with her bitter, divorced friends, and instead seek the company of people who had successfully reestablished relationships despite former divorces. At first, she resisted and claimed that she had nothing in common with these group members. Then she acknowledged two basic facts. First, it was far more energy saving to foster relationships with positive people. Secondly, one of the laws of consciousness is that like goes to like. Bitterness attracts bitterness, whereas love attracts love. She asked herself, where has my bitterness taken me? Have I gotten anything out of it that is positive and helpful? As time progressed, she stopped spending time with her group and began to pursue relationships with healthier, more balanced people. In the company of happier people, she had an exhilarated awareness of how much negativity she was holding inside of herself. She began to be aware that she was consciously holding negativity and choosing to hold it, and she began to look at the costs of such negativity. Her whole social life changed. She became smiling and happier. Her migraine headaches disappeared. Eventually, she fell in love again and joked that falling in love was the best cure she had ever discovered for an ulcer. If we find ourselves in the state of apathy, we can discover the underlying program by asking ourselves what we are really trying to prove. Are we trying to prove that life is rotten? That this is a hopeless world? That it wasn't our fault? That one can't find love? That happiness is impossible? What are we trying to justify? How much are we willing to pay to be quote unquote right? As we acknowledge and let go of the feelings that arise in response to these questions, the answers begin to appear. And that's the end of chapter 4. So I'm just going to briefly summarize some key takeaways from this chapter that I jotted down. Apathy is the belief that I can't. We can become apathetic to the letting go technique itself, where it manifests as resistance to the technique. The way out of it is to remind ourselves of our intention, which is to get higher and freer and to let go of resistance to the technique itself. Analyze if the payoff is worth it. It's what we get for playing the victim. Is that cheap little payoff worth it? Frequently, it's fear underlying the apathy. We talked about the example of public speaking, and for me personally, stand-up comedy. Becoming more conscious means to start looking for the truth for ourselves instead of allowing others to program ourselves. We must accept responsibility to get out of it. And to do what we need to do, we must start questioning everything. Thoughts can be looked at objectively. We have a choice. We can stop giving authority to all the mind's thoughts. We are always free to acknowledge and surrender feelings, but we are also free not to. There are a lot of payoffs to blame, self-pity, martyrdom, victimhood, etc. It's the world's greatest excuse, that is blame. Blame is the world's greatest excuse. But the cost is the loss of our freedom. The first step out of blame is to see that we are choosing to blame. Everything has its yin and its yang, its polarity, its polar opposite. So we can get out of negativity by letting go of resistance to its positive opposite. We are only subject to a negative thought or belief if we consciously say that it applies to us. And he gave the example of people who were able to get plenty of jobs during the Great Depression or after World War II. I think it was after World War II, not the Great Depression. For negativity to apply to our lives, we must first subscribe to it and second, give energy to that belief. Our higher self has unlimited capabilities. We can stop giving away our power to others and begin to own it back again. A frequent cause of apathy is previous experienced traumatic overwhelm. Singer calls that samskara. But now we can begin to put it in a different context. We all did what we thought was best in the moment, or all that we knew to do. And we can similarly look at others the same way and have compassion for them. It's very important who we choose to associate with. Choosing to be with others who have resolved the problem with which we struggle is a great method of overcoming that which we struggle with. And that concludes some key takeaways and insights from this chapter. So I hope you found this video to be helpful and informative and insightful. And if you have any feedback or questions, feel free to leave that in the comments section below. As always, I very much value your feedback. If you liked this video, please don't forget to actually hit the like button and also to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell, which will help yourself not miss a future video on this series or any other video, but also any future videos that I may produce. It also helps me to continue producing videos just like this one, so you're paying it forward, and I really appreciate that. And don't forget to look out for the next video, which will be on chapter 5 on this series. That chapter 5 is going to be discussing grief, so stay tuned for that one. It's a very interesting subject in and of itself. But until then, thanks for watching and for listening, and I look forward to seeing you at the next video. Hey, thanks for watching. I know your time is valuable, and that's one of the many reasons I'm grateful that you watched my video. Check out the next video in this series or in my library. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and the notification bell so that you don't miss a future video. And it will also help me to continue producing videos just like this one. I appreciate it.